cultural bullshit has always existed.
And also cultural
bullshit is what comes bubbling up to the surface when there's economic uncertainty and instability, when people are poor and they're looking around for somebody to blame, and that's when the culture war stuff comes up. Because let's be honest about this, when everybody's doing okay, when the fucking tide is rising and the ships are rising with it, people don't care.
It's a funny...
And that's when you get all the progress moving forward. The reason that we're having this right now is because we've had 15, 14 fucking years of turgid economic shite, of making people with fucking kidney problems having to fucking pay extra for the room where they keep a dialysis machine. All of this pish has resulted in people looking for somebody to blame.
And an easy problem to fix.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you wouldn't have used the term culture war in Germany in like the late 20s into the early 30s.
That's what it was.
Yeah,
well,
and it was an actual...
Well, I'm saying, but the thing is, but what we would have called that would have been, this is how the rise of fascism happens.
Yeah.
It's almost like we've come up with this weird term that the media have invented to get round the fact that the culture war in question here is actually about there's some far-right people coming up with some very fashy ideas, but we don't want to say that because then we might get sued or whatever, or we don't want the headache of it. So we'll say it's a culture war. But you would never describe it in a foreign country where there was obviously a far-right contingent coming up that was absolutely getting into power off the back of economic turmoil. We would call a spade and say that's what this is.
The other thing to ask is whether...
It was obvious, but...
I don't know. The other thing to ask is whether or not there's any room or need. You always have greedy people who try and make the legislation work for them, and they've always existed.
Yeah.
But you have good economic cycles, followed usually by crashes, because it's an inevitable sort of cycle of boom and bust. And it's very difficult to get around that. And I think they've compressed slightly compared to where they were a few hundred years ago. But nonetheless, it's just nature to a certain extent. And when you're on a downward cycle, people look for somebody to blame. And, in the 1600s, it was witches, and now it's trans people. But it's always going to be the same.
But the media's job should not be to play into that. Like a journalist with integrity should be able to identify that's what's happening here.
They can identify it. It's clearly fucking identifiable.
Yeah.
It always starts with, think about the women and children. And that is exactly what the fuck they're doing with this. It's just so blatant.
I'm not arguing back or anything like that, but I'm just saying that I think that I think there's been a bit of a mistake that the politicians, I think, have in some literal cases taken the brunt of this. We were talking earlier on about we've had 2 assassinations, 2 murders that have, is that the same level of hate is not being put upon the media. Now, I'm not advocating for let's go and kill them, I'm not saying that, but I think it's interesting to me that they've kind of been given a free pass, even though they are definitely part of the problem, if not the root cause of the problem. So I think as much as we speak out and trash politicians, as we often do on this podcast, just to sort of bring that into like equilibrium in terms of how the media are involved.
The media all comes back to regulation. The media is only allowed to behave the way it behaves because it's not properly regulated. So there's a really, really good argument that you shouldn't have any foreign ownership in your media. They should have media plurality. You can tell I've had a couple of ciders. I had real difficulty saying plurality then. That there ought to be media plurality.
Plurality.
Nobody should. It's contagious.
I'm not going to try.
Nobody should be able to own too much of the media.
Yeah.
That you need regulation of that, so that you have lots of dissenting voices. Because if you've got a hegemony of the media, then one guy that owns 5 newspapers and a TV station can make the weather.
I mean, that is how Keir has been presented. Talking to people on the street, there is an enormous disconnect between the media presentation of Keir Starmer and this last election and what people are actually saying. And you can see that. I mean, to come back to the people writing comments about how sexy he is.
He really isn't. I mean, I'm not being funny, but he really isn't.
Yeah.
No.
I'm just saying the way that if you believed the media, this would be 1997 all over again. It's not. No. We were there. This is not the case. they'll turn out.
Huge issues with Tony Blair, but he was very charismatic.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer
And got a turnout. I mean, people did actually turn to vote for him. Whereas here, it seems like hardly anyone's turned up, and the few that did went, oh, fucking all right then, I guess Labour, whatever. But that's not how the media coverage is felt. The media coverage has framed it much more as the second coming of Tony Blair.
And it's all very well. So, let's be honest about this. Jeremy Corbyn did, in fact, get more actual votes.
Yeah, the unelectable Corbyn.
But you won't hear that in the media, will you?
You won't. However, that's not how the system works. And it has to be said that Keir Starmer was organised and he's clearly been ready for government. Now, I don't particularly like him and I'm not a Labour voter, but I've got to give him props for the fact that he has actually, obviously, for the last 2 years, he has been ready to go at any fucking time. And he's had his cabinet fucking selections organised. He has had a plan. And I do appreciate that. He's not sexy, but I do appreciate somebody that is prepared and has a plan. I don't like him and I don't agree with everything that he's doing. The stuff on trans rights is just depressing because it just...
It's indicative.
It's just like you're all lying. Every scientific institution in the world disagrees with you. And we all know this. Why are we pretending anything different?
But in terms of his political strategy, he's played a blinder because, he's managed to win a massive majority with less votes than Corbyn got. But that doesn't mean he's popular. No, and so what I would suggest is
he's the cleverest loser. It's a weird way.
He's won a stonking majority on a third of the vote.
Well, that's what I mean.
The trouble with that is that he's probably not now, just like Tony Blair did, he's probably not now going to advocate for proportional representation unless he has sufficient insight to realise that he's not going to win another stonking majority on a third of the vote.
Yeah.
If he has any insight, he might realise that if he brings in proportional representation at some point in the next 5 years, that he and whoever replaces Ed Davey will potentially be able to then have a cohesive government for another 5 years. Whether or not he has sufficient lack of ego to do that remains to be seen. But
they really fucking hate democracy in all its forms, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Tories' refusal to allow us to have a second referendum.
And he's doing the same.
And he's doing the same thing. The refusal to consider PR instead of first past the post. You fucking hate democracy.
Yeah.
You're disenfranchising young voters by introducing ID requirements.
ID requirements that favour old people and disenfranchise young people.
Labour should get away. Should do away with that. It would benefit Labour to do away with that because the only people who benefit from that are Conservative parties across the board.
Yeah.
As any kind of voter disenfranchisement, Conservatives lose when more people turn out to vote, and that is across the board how it works everywhere. I'm glad the Tories are out of power.
Yeah.
And I never thought I would feel so deflated in the event of a Tory loss.
Yeah.
As I did. I didn't feel... I thought when these fuckers finally get their arse handed to them and get told where to go, I'll be popping the champagne, it'll be a day of celebration, and it just wasn't.
It was the first election that in as long as I can remember that I didn't stay up for. I didn't care. I didn't even see the exit poll. I was just like, fuck it. Like, that's how... I mean, well, essentially we called it on the episode we recorded. We went, this is what's going to happen. That's exactly what happened. Labour got a stonking majority. The SNP took a hit. That's it. I don't need anything further. But to Laura's point, that you would think you would want to stay up and have a drink and celebrate the utter dismantling of the Tory party, the destruction. Because to me, I don't differentiate all that much between the UK Labour Party and the UK Tories. I'm like, it's continuity.
So I'm, even though I don't like them that much, I'm going to dissent a little bit because I think the thing that happens too often, and it always happened to us, is that like the unionist side would just not give the best of our politicians credit when they were good and when they were right, just because. Yeah, but you know, like the SNP, they want to break up our country. It's not one country, you fucking cunts. But and they wouldn't give us credit, and we've talked about this. Yeah, they wouldn't give Nicola Sturgeon credit for how good she was. They won't give Mary Black credit for how good she is, and all the rest of it. They won't give us credit even when we're good. So we need to give credit where credit is due, because to do otherwise is to be as partisan as they are, and I refuse to be as partisan as they are.
That's fair.
I am happy that the Tories are gone and that somebody better is in charge. That does not mean that I think that the people who are in charge are as good as they should be. That doesn't mean that I don't long-term want to see Scotland as an independent nation that governs itself. But in the short term, we are where we are. We're a member of the United Kingdom, and I would like the United Kingdom to be governed well. I would like it to be governed better than it was being governed, and I think it is now being governed better than it was. That doesn't mean that I don't think Scotland should be independent. Just as a matter of principle, it should. And then our fights will be our own, and we won't need to worry about what they're doing down there. But we will always, to an extent, need to worry about what they're doing down there because we share a landmass with them. And so even when we are independent, I will still worry about what they are doing down there. And I will still want them to be governed well because it will affect us.
Alternatively, build the wall, bring it back.
Build a wall and make England pay for it.
I hear what you're saying, and I completely agree that you need to give credit where credit's due. I've done the same thing privately. I would never do it on a podcast. I'd get cancelled. I've done the same thing where I've praised some of Trump's policies that he introduced that were actually decent and did decent things. Not many of them, but there were so I'm not just like this is my team. I like this.
Yeah,
I'm also not a single issue voter. Independence is my as a political goal for me, but I'm not a single issue voter. If the SNP did not align with any of my other core values, I would not vote for them.
No.
But I grew up in the west of Scotland. My granddad was in the steelworks during Thatcher's reign. My papa said to me the first time I went to vote, "You can vote for whoever you want as long as you vote for Labour." It was this
good to know. Thanks.
So this was like that. My family were very extremely pro Labour all my life, and I don't think they're as bad as the Tories. I certainly think that I don't rate Keir Starmer at all, but there are people who are now in positions of power, who are in seats that are a far sight better than the Tory government.
Yeah.
And I will grant them that, and I will be open to see what changes they are able to make. My real objection to the Labour Party is that they have moved so far to the right and kowtowed.
Yeah.
And they were the only left-wing opposition party we had in this country. We now do not have a left-wing opposition party. That's my real opposition.
You know, you've got the Democrats, and then you've got the right.
Yeah.
You've got the hard right. You've got the right.
That's my real opposition, and my real opposition is that in order to get the popular vote this time, in order to get the turnout that they got, in order to get the votes that they got, they did not fucking have to do that. They didn't have to kowtow to the right. People did not vote for them because they were more right-wing. If you look at the polls to see who voted Labour, something 95% voted to get the Tories out.
Yeah.
So they could have just gone in there, fucking balls out, progressive, left-wing. They could have done it. They could have gone in and actually advocated for real fucking change, stood by their principles, stood their ground, and actually fucking gone and offered a real alternative and a real change to the Tories, and they haven't. They've kowtowed to the party. It's this thing that Thatcher said when she was interviewed in, was it 2000?
Tony Blair was their greatest achievement.
Yeah. The legacy of the greatest achievement is Tony Blair, because we didn't just defeat our enemies, we convinced our enemies to start thinking like us.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely think that the media coverage around Corbyn, and I always come back to it, his policies weren't even that left-wing. The guy was not a radical, but the very deliberate presentation of just simple suggestions.
Like the BBC putting him in a Russian hat.
Yeah.
You've got it.
The big red background.
The implication that actually just trying to make life better for working people is the equivalency of the Soviet Union. Is that, I think, was very deliberate, and I think where we have arrived is exactly the same thing in America. This is just that there is enormous financial institutions that it suits them and their business to not have anybody talking about taxing billionaires, really getting into the how you'd actually go about resolving a lot of the economic issues we have globally. And I think the most depressing bit about the whole thing for me, though, is you were saying there about your papa and Labour. I don't think we should ever forget that in Scotland, it was just that's what you did. You vote Labour. But within the space of, 2 election cycles or less, we'd completely flipped. And I think one of the most ongoing frustrations with England is, why haven't you even got close? You've gone the other way. Why haven't you got even close to that? I mean, the fact that the Corbyn, there was something there. Yeah. And okay, he's still an independent. He's done very well as an independent. So it would seem like there is still an inbuilt there's an audience for that.
Of course.
So why, what I mean? In the way the SNP pick up the ball, run, make a go of it, it is a bit frustrating that down south there doesn't seem to be anybody with that kind of, or a group with that get up and go energy on the left to really make a run of it. And I don't know if that's just the media have beaten them down so much now that they can't rise up for that.
I think a part of that is you need to look at the way the United Kingdom purports to be this union of equals, but is actually 80% England.
Yeah.
Right. Then kind of 20% Scotland, England, Ireland, and the other bit.
Well, they forgot Northern Ireland even existed.
Oh, well, that was classic, that Keir Starmer saying they had a mandate from, all 4 nations. All right. Exactly how many fucking Labour MPs have you got from Northern Ireland then, you fucking roaster? Do you know what I mean? I think you'll find that's what 1, 2, fuck all.
Yeah.
Right? You don't even fucking stand there. You do a deal with the party that advocates against unionism for a united Ireland. But no, you can't do a deal with the SNP. You can't fucking stand your people down in Scotland and never have a fucking Tory MP here again.
But just imagine having the fucking guts with that low a turnout to go, I have a mandate. I mean, in the most technicality sense, yes. But that is not you saying the majority of the country have backed.
This is where we need to grow up. The United Kingdom needs to grow up. I mean, if you look at the way proportional representation works in democracies, that you end up with a plurality of parties. You'll end up with 6 or 7 parties. They'll be grouped around maybe core issues, and ones that you can find common cause with will form a coalition. So after after an election in a lot of countries, it'll be 2 weeks before there's a decided result, because they've all got to get together and have a chat about who's going to form what with whom.
I know, it's fucking mental, isn't it? Like the night of the morning after the election,
there's a man outside.
Yeah, there's a man outside. There's not even like a proper transition. It's just
in America, the president is voted on something like November the 4th or the 5th. And it's fucking January the 20th before there's a change. Now, that is too long, arguably. Trump managed to cause all sorts of trouble. It used to be longer. It used to be March or something like that.
It was a busy month, January, for them, wasn't it?
Well, the problem used to be that, you'd got to get the results out to everywhere, and then you got to count everything and come back. And it did used to take fucking weeks, if not months. The reason it became January instead of something like March is because President Hoover kept trying to nobble Roosevelt. But anyway, yes, it takes longer in some places.
Yeah,
and that's as it should be. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? In much the same way that you fucking go and have a look at a house and you spend 15 minutes looking at it, and then you spend 200,000 fucking pounds on it, you'd spend longer picking a vacuum cleaner.
It wouldn't have done for Rishi. Apparently, the reason that they called the election, we speculated the reason they called the election so early was so that he could enrol his children in school in California. There's also been speculation that the reason that they called the election when they did is because there are hundreds of thousands of fixed rate mortgages that are coming up over the next couple of months.
Oh, they're about to go on to the variable rate. Some people are,
If you thought it was bad until now, it's fixing to get worse. It's fixing to get a lot worse.
So if there had been a transition of power, you might have seen some of that fall out.
Yeah. So I think this is. I don't think Starmer's he will not be stood at the next general election. I think that we're about to hit much rougher seas.
Well, no, I agree. I mean, so I bought my house in 2018. When I used a broker for my mortgage, and she offered me various things. And there was one that was about 50 quid a month cheaper, but it was only for sort of 2-3 years. But she offered me the one that I took, which was ever so slightly more expensive, but it was a 10-year deal. I went, I'll have that one. I can 50 quid a month, in the grand scheme of things, is neither here nor there for knowing exactly what my mortgage will be for 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'll take that. And oh boy, did that turn out to be a good choice. Fucking hell, did that turn out to be a good choice.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very unique set of circumstances compared to what most people are going to be walking into.
It was purely that at the time in 2018, we were 2 years off Brexit. And I just thought there's going to be massive economic uncertainty because of this. And I thought governments might fall. Like I didn't know what was going to happen, but I just had this sense
this is going to be bad.
We should start our podcast. We should talk about this.
No, I just thought stuff will happen. Yeah. Stuff will happen. There will be things happening. All things considered, I can absorb an extra 50 quid. That's not a great deal because I've had a mortgage go large before. I mean, I thought, well, the worst that happens is I don't live here 10 years and I sell it and whatever, blah, 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 blah. But I can afford that and that will be fine. Now, I remember a mate of mine giving me sort of like, oh, fucking 10-year deal, blah, blah, blah. Why have you done that? Blah, blah. We'll see. Yeah. And it's been...
People's mortgages have doubled. In some instances.
It's terrifying. I mean, I think about...
This is what I think the public are going to hear will be rightly or wrongly, because, I mean, he's inherited this mess to an extent. I mean, also, he's totally politically aligned with the Tories, so I kind of blame him too. But, yeah.
No, I think that's unfair.
Okay.
Right? I think I think he is aligned with where Conservatives were in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
Okay? And then the Conservatives went nuts with Thatcher. So the conservatism of Thatcher is not traditional conservatism. We've lived with that for all of our lives.
Yeah.
But it's not traditional conservatism, which was much more of a sort of slightly patriarchal, but we, the fucking ruling classes, need to take care of the lower classes.
It's too big a conversation to go into, but I mean, there's been a lot of... I mean, both my parents would admit to that. They bounced around houses quite a lot, and there's landlording. There's a whole other conversation about why we've ended up in this mess. And I think that Keir would be very continuity with all of that.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe eventually when these people start to get really old, they're like, oh, we did all that wrong. That was really bad. And okay, fair enough. But still, the point is that, yeah, I think when that hits, and it's going to hit big over the next few months, that I think that he will be held accountable for that. Rightly or wrongly, he will be, that's it. People are already miserable. Brexit's fucked us over. The pandemic's fucked us over. The economy is humped. The Bank of England don't know what the fuck they're doing.
That's become very
fucking clear.
Yeah, I think that because he's the guy at the top of the pile, he's the Prime Minister, that he will be held accountable. And I think if Angela Rayner is playing a smart political game, she will be way ahead, laying that foundation for a run. And I think actually that she, to me, it's not great, but it's certainly an improvement. She strikes me more as traditional Labour, slightly more edging that way. She's someone that I could probably faintly recognise as being a bit left-wing in a way that I don't really see in Keir Starmer at all. I don't think he's going to make it until the end of the 4 years.
I mean, to your earlier point, people have very short memories. So if
I disagree. I think he is unbelievably ruthless, and I think he'll stay put. He's always just tried to get rid of Angela Rayner. I would predict that you will see more negative things emerging in the press about Angela Rayner that will be briefed from within the Labour Party. He will try and get rid of her because he knows that she's the real opposition. Yeah, I think the real opposition to Keir Starmer right now is Angela Rayner.
Yes, I would agree.
With regards to where everybody is at with somewhere to live, Labour look like they're going to build some houses. That's great. That needs to be done. one of the problems that we've currently got is that people can't afford a mortgage. It's very difficult to get a mortgage. Mortgages are expensive. And there is, at the same time, not enough property to rent because, and this is something that nobody really wants to talk about, but trying to regulate the private property sector has meant that a lot of landlords have left. And the landlords that have left are the small individual landlords who were probably more inclined to be the nice ones, to be honest with you. I mean, there will have been some arseholes within that, but there will be a lot of people who will maybe have had one or two properties that they will have had a keen interest in taking care of. And the burden of regulation upon them has become so great that they can't be asked and they've sold them. The result of which is that there are now some mega landlord kind of companies.
Yeah, the big conglomerates that they buy up entire blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the first place to do it, and they go over asking, so young couples going out looking to buy their first place can't get them because these big companies are buying up everything.
My son was trying to buy somewhere and he'd saved and had what ought to have been enough. And he was going out to viewings and he'd be on his way to a viewing and be told that somewhere had been taken off the market because someone from London had just bought it without even seeing it.
Yeah,
that should be
all the time.
It should be illegal, but this is the kind of thing that I don't think Starmer will do. I don't think he will make that illegal.
There are enough empty properties.
You should be allowed to own it or rent it out. But you should not be allowed to just have a company that just buys loads.
I mean, the Greens
using a bunch of VC money a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But there are enough buildings and homes sitting empty and ready to live in the UK right now to completely eradicate homelessness. Yeah. People are not living in the street because there's nowhere for them to stay. And they're just sitting empty. They're sitting empty, and there's people who are sleeping in the fucking street. And I don't care about whether you say you're left wing or you're right wing or you're centrist or
people are sleeping in the street.
There's no magic money tree or like the economy, blah blah blah. As a fucking human being, that is unacceptable. And I think this is something that will be looked back on in the future with abject fucking disgust that we allowed this to continue.
When I'm saying the sort of terms like left wing, right wing, and conservative and Labour and these things, I think that it's almost some of these terms we end up talking like cross purposes because that's a far better way to look at it. When I'm describing Keir as being continuity Tory, that's what I'm talking about. There needs to be a generational break to say that the stuff that has been completely normalised for about post-war generation basically normalised. It's not okay.
And
it's all driven by the Reagan, the Thatcher, that brain that's coming. And I want
to be clear because advocating for landlords is not my most popular stance, but what I'm describing here is the problem whereby you decide, right, okay, so every property that's rented out needs a certificate for gas, a certificate for the electrics, a certificate for this, a certificate for that, blah, blah. Right, fine. We could all agree that ought to be, everybody should be able to expect that their property is, that they rent out is safe. Great, I agree. So if you want to bring in that legislation that all of those things exist, bring in an agency that monitors that and charges the landlord for it. But you don't do that. What you do is you privatise that element of it. So every landlord has now got to go and pay private companies to do that. Whether or not that certificate that they get is legitimate or not is probably bollocks. But what you've done is create a burden of expenditure on the landlord that may or may not give a real result that benefits the actual tenant. Why not instead create a government department that actually puts that law into practice and issues those certificates and charges the landlords a fair rate for doing it, does the inspection properly, refuses to give a certificate to properties that aren't appropriately safe. So all of the crap properties don't get certified. And if the landlord can't or won't bring it up to spec, you can compulsory purchase it, leave the tenant in place so they don't lose where they live. The landlord gets paid the fair value of the property, but gets removed from the property, and you by default build up a stock of properties that you can provide. But no, instead we make a law, we put the burden on the landlord, and nobody actually benefits, and a whole load of people who can't manage the admin of that remove themselves from the market, and you end up with a conglomeration of properties owned by businesses who are even less kind to the tenants.
I have a strong belief that in terms of generation that we're in, that we need to accept, you and I will probably be all right, that the majority are going to have it shit.
Yeah.
And we need, because what you just described there makes perfect sense, but knowing how governments work, that's a 10-year project, easily. Yeah. I mean, that you don't do that.
No, governments think in terms of 10 and 20-year projects,
so
and that's what
I'm saying about the generational bit, is that's what I'm saying, a generational break of that old mentality needs to go away. A new one needs to be brought in that could implement things like that, but we would have to accept that we are not going to reap the benefits of that. We would have to implement these things selflessly on the knowledge that the next generation will benefit from them, because that's kind of how things used to work.
Yeah.
Whereas this kind of cult of self shit that's been happening for the last sort of 30, 40, 50 years
the
is
world
the
is
problem.
a better place when old men plant trees and under whose shade they will never sit. And that is not the political system that we currently have.
No.
And if you advocate for things like eradicating homelessness, eradicating child poverty, like introducing things like a UBI to make sure everyone can fucking eat and heat their homes, you're accused of being naive. And that's not how...
Or communists, a dirty Soviet Union,
it's like
Russian hat-wearing
it's not politicians' jobs to look after you. And I'm like, oh really? How'd you learn so much about politics? Here I was thinking that's exactly their fucking job, and exactly why we elect them and give them our tax money, so they can improve society for everybody.
It drove the furlough drove me nuts, because it was the chance that we could have had to actually just give everybody a UBI and leave it in place. Because the truth of the matter is, the benefit system means that people get trapped in the system, whereby if I can't take the opportunity to do a little bit of work and earn a bit of money because I'll lose X amount of Z, so I'm stuck doing fuck all and being economically inactive. A UBI would mean that right, everybody's got enough to just fucking do the basics, but and if you want to just fucking live like that, fine. Yeah. You're the cost of that, fine. But most people won't. Most people can see opportunities, because the ability to take an opportunity is what actually drives economic growth.
Yeah.
And rich people can always afford to take the chance, and poor people can't.
Exactly. It's the same thing. It's like, why on earth are they still paying for university in England? Because what you've created a situation where there's no upward mobility, because they can't educate themselves. So if you come from a poor background, an impoverished background in England, unlike in Scotland where it wouldn't matter. James McAvoy did a great talk about this quite recently, referencing acting, because down south you have to pay to go these fancy pants acting schools, but because up here it's the edge got SAS. Yeah. So he could go to the conservatoire and learn his craft, and now he's off and he's moved up. I mean, he's from just around the corner, like in Drumchapel. He is like a very average dude in terms of his economic background. But we in Scotland have the opportunity. Yeah. I mean, Laura's a complete case in point. I mean, Laura is like extended from a working class underlying background, but because got to go to uni, could apply for SAS, is now basically sat in a well-paid job. She's worked her way out of that, as has the rest of her family. But that is not the case down south, because the means of which they can lift themselves out of poverty don't really exist in the way they do up here. But this is where Corbyn got so much shite for just suggesting maybe that should be allowed, maybe that should be a thing we should implement, and then
Stalin over here.
The fucking Stalin running about. What a mental idea that is. And that's where
I actually like when children starve to death in their homes. That's my favorite.
That's why, keep in mind, that's what Keir stomped out. So that's who you're dealing with. That's when a Corbyn came along and was like, actually, maybe some of these ideas that really aren't very radical at all and actually economically benefit, to your point. Keir's the guy going, we can't be having that. That's the character we're dealing with. So when I was saying he's continuity Tory, we can split hairs around that a bit. But to me, that's the thrust of it. That's where I do not see the difference between the UK Labour Party currently and the old Tory party, because at the core of it, when you drill right down to the main motivators, that's what's driving it.
I agree. I just think if we can't concede that things have improved a little bit,
yes, they are better.
Then we're as bad as them when they refuse to give us any credit for anything we've done.
Which I agree.
Keir Starmer's not sexy.
He has all the sex appeal of a bowl of Alpine. I just
like Hal Pepper.
actually, I just the words were no sooner out my mouth, and I thought, actually, if we fucking global help, and
He's whatever kind of supermarket brand muesli you get in a second-rate bed and breakfast.
the one that nobody touches that comes with the continental breakfast.
Yeah, with the kind of horse oats that you're still chewing 5 hours later.
Yeah, is that? I just think
Angela Rayner is Cocoa Pops, though, isn't she?
she is about Cocoa Pops, and that I shouldn't like it.
I know.
I shouldn't like it. It's not as bad for me, but it's a bit tasty. I do like her background, and I like her wit and I like her fire.
I like the look on her face when she's giving a Tory a hard time. It gives me a bit of a lady boner.
Yeah, but listen, I have girlhood right now.
I like how much she frightens them.
Yeah,
That's what it is. I like how unnerved they all are. Like all those posh boys, because they look at her and they all fancy her and know that she's a granny with great tits and she's got fantastic hair. I'm really jealous of her hair. She's got
basically
really great hair.
she's a weapon. That is a nuclear warhead. They
can't classify her. That's the thing. She's a sexy granny. She's a fucking she's 3 filters on Pornhub that they probably pick, right? They can't quite work out. They can't quite work out what they feel, so she terrifies them. And that's what I like about her.
Yeah.
We're just discussing Angela Rayner and our lady bonus.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's no Leanne Wood. That's all I'll say. She's no Leanne Wood.
You need to get your fucking priorities in order, sunshine. I mean, did we say that the classic soundbite that everyone's been saying, the Labour did not win, the Tories lost?
Well, that's true.
But they're acting as if they won. They're doing the victory lap.
Yeah, I think that's the bit that really, really irritates me, actually.
It's a bit cringe. You should really be... You should really be kind of going... we've won a majority, but I think it's clear that we've got ground to make up here. We have to. I want to prove to the British electorate who did not vote for me that actually that we were going to make real change in this country. Or just not the people who didn't vote for me, because that sounds like you're kowtowing to Conservatives, which, to be fair, she is doing that.
Humility.
I mean, the people who did not have the energy to come out and vote recognise that you have depressed the vote. Recognise that you have created voter apathy. You, Keir Starmer, have created voter apathy by being so fucking uninspiring as a person and as a political figure. Recognise that. Don't go about fucking smug doing your victory lap. So I tell you what, see if you had stuck googly eyes in the broom, it would have been doing this. It would have been doing the victory lap. It would have been making me cringe now.
It's a lack of humility.
Yeah. A lack of humility and a lack of just embracing of reality.
Yeah.
Nobody was excited to go out and vote for Keir. Nobody actually thinks Keir's sexy. That is propaganda. That's straight up lies. I don't know who said that.
Guardian, apparently.
I think the worst thing is how pleased with themselves Scottish Labour are, because you get the feeling
You've
that
done
they
fuck all, mate.
They've ridden a wave that happened in England, and they think that they've won a watch. And I saw somebody sent me somebody else's fucking tweet, but it was, oh, well, it's only 5 years until they all lose their seats. I wonder why.
Yeah.
They think that they've got back to where they ought to be because they feel entitled, and they are absolutely fucking full of themselves. It's like, you've done nothing.
Yeah.
You've done nothing. The Tories that were voting for Tory, the unionists that were voting Tory to keep us out, have voted you instead to keep us out. That is what has happened for the most part. We've lost some of our vote, some to you and some to not voting at all.
Yeah.
But those people will potentially come back to us.
Especially if they're independence voters, if that's the reason they've been voting SNP. I think that the case for independence is only going to get stronger.
I think the next year or so will get pretty rough economically, and I think in 4 years' time at the next general election, I think that's going to be the big one. I think that's going to be the real game changer. This was sort of framed as that, but I think the next one.
The thing that we need to be looking to is 2026 in Holyrood.
That's right.
Because in 2026, if we lose to Labour in 2026 at Holyrood, if the Labour Party takes hold, then there will be a severe dismantling of the things that we take for granted, like education and prescriptions and stuff like that.
And possibly the Parliament itself. I think eventually the end game for e-government in England will be to get rid of the devolved administrations. And I think Labour...
Well, now we're not in the EU, they could do. So that's something to be...
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons for why they were very keen for Brexit.
Certainly the Tories were, but, bear in mind, they're not technically in charge anymore.
Yeah. I know Labour did bring back the Scottish Parliament, but I think that they will see...
It was only as a result of... I can't remember the details, I am sorry, but it was only as a result of that they needed to.
But I definitely think the next... you're right, but there's the mid-step, obviously, of the Holyrood election. The SNP need to rebound off of this, because the minute the public start to perceive that momentum is lost and get on the back foot, it can deviate very quickly.
But I'm going to say that if in the short term we keep shooting our mouths off, so here's the thing. At the moment, the media narrative is, woo, Labour Party, woohoo, right? So the best thing we can do is be quiet, because that will pass.
Yeah,
they'll get bored.
Don't be sore losers like the England team.
I was a reader of the NME in the 1980s, right? Build them up, build them up, build them up. Oh, the number one, knock them down, right? Yeah. That's what will happen. The media will get bored, and there will be scandals, and there will be fuck ups.
They'll do what they did to Britney.
It will always happen.
And then Keir Starmer will not be sexy.
It will. It's just inevitable. Yeah. And at that point,
do you think the Guardian were on a headline saying Keir Starmer's a minger?
Probably not. But there will be. Right now it's woohoo, and we can't fight against woohoo. But woohoo will dissipate, and when woohoo dissipates, we'll still be there. And when woohoo dissipates, that's the point at which we come forward with opposition.
Yeah.
And there's just no point doing anything now. You're trying to outshout a football match. There's no point. Just wait and let it die down. It will die down.
It's very funny that, to me, the exact thing you just said there is probably what we should have done after 2014. And I think this is the conversation now.
We drew a bit too much attention to ourselves.
Yes, what we didn't do, and we used to joke about this on the podcast quite a bit, about how the 45%, the T-shirt, I'm a loser on it.
I know.
Yeah, there was a lot of what you just said there. After 2014, there had to be acknowledgement that we lost, and we had to reconfigure, we had to change, we had to do something. And I feel that for the last 10 years, there's been a complete denial. Still, it was like, well, we did nothing wrong, but we didn't win, so we must have done something wrong. So the people in charge have to then adapt, move on, baton pass, prep the next generation for it, let's go. And I think that the good thing about this election result is it feels that, that's broken through the noise of the movement, and it's addressed the fact that actually just banging on about India F2 all the time is not the way to achieve this. And there's more of a realistic approach now.
I also think that independence will probably be achieved by a much more incremental approach, the way it was for the likes of New Zealand and Canada and stuff like that, whereby there was a sort of gradual distancing until the point where nobody really notices and you become independent. But we also need to ask ourselves, why do we want to be independent? For what reasons do we want to be independent? And we need to be talking about the benefits rather than always fucking banging on about how awful the Tories are. The Tories are awful, that's a given. But we need to be talking about the positive case for us being a small, inconsequential nation that benefits us as individuals.
I think that, yes, and also to evidence to the public that we would have politicians or leaders in place that would be able to pull it off. Because I think that's not gone well over the last decade as well.
Well, I suppose it's the Scottish football team problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're up against the world with, we've only got a few million of us from which to pick the talent.
Exactly. It's a thing that, would I have termed it as, do I think Scotland should be independent? I think it's more that I don't think the UK should exist. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, completely.
It's not so much about saltires and being free and all this other stuff. It's more about the UK feels like an institution that is built on the back of very bad things that feel like in the 21st century we should not be glorifying these things.
Yeah.
And it comes down to that. With that said, though, the principle of that is important, but I wouldn't want to pursue that at the economic detriment, the well-being of the people on the island, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's where I've always been a little bit more even right up to the vote, I didn't believe in 2014 when I voted yes that we were going to be independent. I went and I voted yes, but I knew we're going to lose this. This is not going to work. But I was very sceptical then about if we were to go independent with the people that were in charge, Salmond, that is this actually going to, is this a good idea? And I feel that is, I still think there's a vibe in the country of that, of I think people want it, but they're sceptical about the personalities involved and their ability to deliver it. You know, I mean, there's so much stuff about like how would the military work, like LATSI and SCATSI's, like the two air traffic control systems. Basically, London's so big, London just do their bit. So SCATSI, the Scottish bit, does most of the north of England as well. Driving licences are all down there. How does this work? There's just layer after layer after layer. The cynical bit is like, well, if we can't even do a ferry contract, can't we pull this off? So they do need to optically, I think, really convince the public.
So that's an argument for a much more gradualist approach.
I agree. And I think that to come back to the main point, after 2014, that is the first port of call. We should have said aloud, this is a 10 to 15 to 20 year journey we're now on, as opposed to what we did, which was as soon as it was over, 2015 general election, India F2's next year, and that was a mistake. What we weren't doing was preparing ourselves for a long haul journey, which is what we should have done.
Yeah, I suppose for myself personally, I never imagined it was anything less than a sort of 15-year project, because
there was still so much momentum after 2014.
Yeah.
But it's hard to just, I mean, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
We look back at how things have panned out, all things considered, say we should have done this differently. But I think there was a real feeling at the time, certainly like most people that I spoke to.
Yeah. There was quite, I think that by having that general mentality, which I can sympathise with, I can understand why it was there, but it gave us blind spots, severe blind spots.
I mean, part of the reason that mentality existed was because of the way they won. And they won by pissing fear into the ears of old people. Yeah. And so there was a huge sense that we really did nearly win. And by offering a positive case, and that they only won, and it felt like cheating to just scare people and lie to people. And you realise that it's effectively, because what they were offering was fucking salted earth. Right, well, you can go if you want, but if you go, we will do fuck all to help you. We will fight you on everything. As opposed to a sort of general common decency of, well, this is a union of equals, and if you decide to go, then we need to learn to cooperate as neighbours.
See, I don't disagree with this, but this is quite similar to the narrative that Salmond said to me about even just dealing with the BBC. I was very naive about, how they would be.
Well, that much was obvious.
But the counterpoint would be, it's like, yeah, mate, but I also watched you in those debates, Alistair Darling, and apart from making some very funny jokes at the time, you're like, you had nothing. So, I mean, you can say, like, well, I expect them to play ball, and I thought this and that. And it's like, well, yeah, but you've also got to live up to your end of the bargain.
I didn't expect them to play ball, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't expect that they ought to.
Yeah.
We should be disappointed by the fact that they don't. We should be expecting of the fact that they won't, but that doesn't mean that they oughtn't.
Not necessarily accusing you of whataboutery, but I think that this is sort of, that has been part of the problem within the movement of, rather than focusing on, which to me is the part we can control.
Yeah.
The bit we can control is, we ain't got no fucking plan, which was what Salmond very clearly illustrated to the world. So we have to change that bit. Now, we can't control what they're doing, but we can control our bit.
Yeah.
And rather than making this, so things like, people like Wings maybe not a good choice as your main kind of media rep in the movement. We can control that bit. We can start swapping this stuff out. These were the things that we didn't do.
Yes.
What I think you're right, that the mentality became, they cheated. We did everything right. We're all fucking amazing, and they're the problem, as opposed to looking internally to how we can improve our practices.
One of the problems that we had and we still have was this idea of, so the currency was the one that really struck me, is that Salmond essentially went for the idea of a currency union because it was the thing that had been suggested by the likes of Alistair Darling, and then they just said, no, you can't have one. It's like, but you said, well, that's not fair, because dodged your head when I punched, right? Okay. It does not matter what we pick as policy, that it won't be the right answer because they will refuse it. And this idea that, well, if we'd only done this instead of that, then it would have been all right. No, that's not how it's ever going to work. They are always going to.
But I think that was so we learned that lesson in 2014.
But did we? Because I don't feel we did actually.
The lesson was
You and me maybe did.
That's it. The lesson was there to be taken, but we didn't do it. So this is what I'm saying. But we should have realised that, okay, so they're not going to play ball at all.
Ever.
So therefore, the whole approach to how we deal with the media needs to change. The whole approach to how we deal with the economy has to change. And think about that as an element now, which wasn't there previous. So we could have been spending the last 10 years really building up essentially kind of armaments, not literal, but like policy armaments to go, this is kind of a war. It's a Cold War, but, you know, we need to accept that we are in a fight and we need to strengthen our cause. Whereas the kind of wee blue book shite that was going on, this is rubbish. And I think there was a real feeling, and I mean from editorial level, if you like, within the movement, that all this was fine and great and good. And you could see immediately we are on the wrong track here, you know, from the jump.
If you have to, you have to start from the premise that the other side's not going to give you any ground whatsoever. Therefore, you have to not work. There's no point trying to fucking shadow box. Yeah. You've got to work out what the right thing is, not what the thing that might fit into the imaginary lock and open a key that means that the other side starts playing with you. They're not going to. Yeah. So you actually have to say, what's the right thing to do? Yeah. And what's the argument for the right thing to do? And then we say that we will do the right thing and be prepared to justify it. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the only thing that will actually win.
Yeah. That's it. And I think that this is good, that the fact that they've taken that thump of the election, that we're now starting to have these conversations that we should have really had about 10 years ago.
And I want to give him a bit of credit, because I've seen John Swinney do this, actually fucking dismantle an interviewer for interrupting him. Because that's another fucking thing. We've got to fucking, like, this is the thing, like Fiona Bruce, Lewis Koonsberg, was it, I think it was actually Radio Scotland, but, you know, just fucking tell her, shut up, you've asked me a question.
I think people want to actually hear my answer to your question rather than just you interrupting me.
Yeah.
Just like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, shut up.
Yeah. But that kind of assertiveness as well. And, you know.
I mean, this is where I'll give John Swinney credit, because he manages to be very assertive whilst not coming across as bolshy.
Yeah, I said that on the last episode. I said that I think he's better than Nicola and Alex because he can be.
He doesn't come across as chippy.
Yeah, he's got that very well down with it. But also, just when the media are blatantly trying to do a gotcha thing, you just don't buy into it. Mm. You don't. That's what you said years ago about BBC Question Time. Just don't go on.
Yeah,
like you can actually just choose to just disengage. If you, I mean, like from the top level, like the Sam and all flaws aside, I mean, clearly identified. The BBC were utterly malicious in what they were doing during India F1, to the point where as we've established many times on this podcast, it actually pushed a whole bunch of viewers over to watching the Russian state broadcaster. Yeah. They did such a bad job with their objectivity. But we now know that. So why would we want to engage with them diplomatically? You know, they've shown their arse. We should be pushing back, you know, to so to speak, to say, you know, we're going on the attack here. You know, you were not fair and objective. You know, you're not giving me a fair interview. You're trying to trip me up with some ridiculous questions about toilets and trans people, which is not relevant to the overall discussion for the welfare of Scotland right now. Or just decline the interview. Just say, I'm not going to do this. You don't have to go and do these stupid TV debates with the other leaders. You don't have to do any of it. All you have to do is be good at the job. Because that's the biggest comeback you can have, is to basically give them as little ammo to shoot at you as possible.
I think that politicians really had to start shaming journalists who were asking that question and laughing in their fucking faces and going, are you not embarrassed?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Are you not embarrassed? Because obviously by asking the question, regardless of how I answer, you've already created a conversation for the culture war. Are you not embarrassed? Is this actually your job?
Because let's be honest about this. Half of the answers that anybody normal would give would actually exclude people who are biologically female as a result of having had a hysterectomy or ovarian cancer or had a birth defect or
being over the age of or under the age of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Because language, here's the thing, language is not biological. Language is just a bunch of fucking sounds that we made up to communicate with each other. So what the fuck are we doing? Are you not journalists? Do you not have degrees in this shit? I know what the fuck you're doing. You know what the fuck you're doing. You think your audience are so fucking stupid that they are going to buy this. And that's what people needed to be doing, and nobody was doing it because they were all so fucking scared.
Yeah, I think this is the thing that we got into this a little bit on the previous election episode about the sort of media and how I think that needs to change. And I don't think they're as powerful, especially in the Scottish media. The Scottish media think they're a lot more powerful than they are.
Well, I think a huge amount of people have just tuned out. And I mean, this is one of the things I think Swinny... I asked my mates, and I'm like, nah, who the fuck listens to Radio Scotland? Oh, nobody.
Yeah.
And the viewing figures back this up. I mean, they tried that fucking programme, The Nine and whatever.
The
viewing figures were
backwards to appease these people is stupid.
Stop it.
Just tell them to fuck off. I mean, that was the downfall of Nicola. And it's so dumb that it went back to this whole, the trans issue, basically. Because Nicola I think she even said as much in the resignation speech, if we just accept that resignation speech was what it appeared to be, was saying that the way that the media are dealing with us now, that this has changed. This is not what I was kind of trained in, what I've grown up in. This is a whole different world that I don't feel comfortable dealing with. And, okay, I'll accept that. But a younger person that will hopefully, follow on from Swinny, you go in there like a ball of energy, and stand up for yourself. Don't let them play this stupid game that they've been playing, because they're not as powerful as they think. I mean, who gives a fuck? They're going to smear you. I mean, if you can't take a smearing, you're in the wrong game.
About this, if the SNP refused to go on BBC Scotland, Radio Scotland tomorrow, who would notice? Only people that are already not voting for them.
Yeah. Exactly. I think some of the stuff, I remember the time they walked out of Parliament, I thought that was really fucking cool. And I'm just going that's the way to do it. Yeah. You don't empower the institutions.
Only 9 of them. Yeah. We're not going to get the same amount of coverage, and we're not going to be third party and third question sort of thing at Prime Minister's questions and things like that. Then we need to be looking at using more stunts to get noticed. And so this is the point at which perhaps removing our MPs from Parliament might be something to consider doing at some point.
It needs to go a little bit... Salmon's way of pissing people off is just by being a dick. But there needs to be some feather ruffling here. I think this is what I was saying before about when the court ruling came back about the Section 30. I'm thinking, right, that's your justification. You can kick off a bit now. I'm not meaning violently or anything like that. That's when you can start getting a wee bit shirty with, your journalists. You can start, because now you've got them on the back foot. Because it's what you want.
It's not voluntary, is it?
It's not voluntary. This isn't. So, do you believe in democracy? You can start turning this back.
So, are you anti-democracy? And have you always been anti-democracy? Is that why? Is that like been acting as a state broadcaster and orchestrating an entire propaganda campaign to scupper the 2014 referendum? Is because you are actually anti-democracy, as you're demonstrating right now.
Does the BBC agree with that court ruling? I'm interested to know that.
Yeah.
Do they support the findings of that? And by doing so, that would mean that they don't believe in democracy.
The stance.
Oh, they should not have a stance.
Because they're just asking questions. That's the thing. They're just asking questions.
Just like Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And